the definition of financial planning is too narrow a space to actually describe where we want to go. And what you've been talking about, Joe, and what we're trying to develop is effectively a whole new sector. And it's a little bit unsteady because I don't think anybody has broached this before. It's a combination of a number of areas. But I feel if we don't get this right, I just don't really see any other area out there within our own economy of people taking this on, because ultimately working as a financial planner is a love affair. And it's a love affair of care and compassion and empathy for the people we work with. So ultimately, there's no point in us delivering a message that, by the way, you've got $1 million in your pension, congratulations, but I'm really sorry to hear you now have type 2 diabetes. You've got high blood pressure, you have cholesterol that's through the roof, and your quality of life is just going to be eroded over time. So I think it really comes back to us to make this big leap and decision. Where do we want to be?
What does it mean to lead a second-generation financial advice firm? Not just by carrying forward a family name, but by evolving its purpose. In this episode, I speak with Mark Hedderman, a CFP professional, CEO of Hedderman Financial Solutions, and president of the LIA, Ireland's leading financial services education body. Mark's parents, Maurice and Sue, founded HFS in 2007. Today, Mark leads the business alongside his brothers. Sound familiar? Bringing a renewed vision to their family legacy, one that integrates financial structure with something far less tangible, but just as essential, well-being. Because Mark understands something that's often overlooked in financial advice, that money doesn't exist in a vacuum. It flows through our lives. It affects the decisions, stress levels, relationships, even our sense of self. And just as money can shape well-being, well-being also shapes how we use our money. It's kind of a circle. In this conversation, we explore how Mark is redefining what it means to be a trusted advisor by putting human well-being at the center of the financial planning process. So, Mark, we've had a bit of a conversation beforehand. I'm really excited, and I know that you are, about having this conversation today. I met you at the FAAA Congress in sunny Perth at the time, and I remember sitting down in breakfast and listening to this fella with a very different accent, and thinking to myself, oh my God, he's got a different accent, but how aligned am I with this particular individual, and how similar are our kind of backgrounds? And I thought we might start the episode by actually just having a little bit of a chat about how you kind of came up through financial planning and the whole family legacy thing, because it's kind of fascinating.
Yeah, appreciate that. And to be honest, my whole selling point at the moment is the accent, Joe. So it's something I'm definitely doubling down on. I was actually listening back to the FAAA podcast with Fraser and Ben today, and the big selling point was the accent. So for everybody out there, this accent will travel is probably the best way, particularly the sunny locations. As I say that from a 2-degree cold Bray, County Wicklow at the moment, where, versus what we were experiencing in Perth of 30 degrees a few weeks ago. It's hard to believe.
Yeah, we can handle the Irish accent. We've got a few Gaelic footballers in the AFL in Melbourne, so we can handle it.
That's right. Yeah, we're delighted, and we've actually a relative. My sister-in-law's nephew was playing for Collingwood. Would you believe, young Walsh?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so he was one of the picks last year or the year before. So we're delighted. We have a family link to the AFL, along with obviously that Gaelic football link as well. So, yeah, and I'll be honest, it was magnificent getting to spend time in Australia. I lived there 15 years ago, and I'm mostly on the East Coast, and getting time to get over to see family and spend time in places like Fremantle and going up and down the West Coast. It's really refreshing, and spending time with yourself, James, and our other colleagues in the at the FAAA Congress was so refreshing. Like, I spoke about this, obviously opened the talk with it on the Tuesday morning. Is we would certainly look at the Australian advice community as the gold standard in respect to where things have gone, and this sort of appetite to continue pushing and evolving. It's really, really refreshing. And I suppose if I was to bring it back to where we are and kind of my own journey, we have a family practice that's coming up on 20 years in business that was established by my parents. And I was very fortunate to join them in 2011, having spent a year or so in Melbourne myself, and it was a real eye opener. I'd left Ireland in 2008 and 2009, at a time when, as you'd probably be aware, like the country was in a really, really tough place. I was a recent graduate from university, having studied overseas in France, and had come back and finished my university degree in Dublin, and was just really, really struggling to get a job. So my aspirations at the time were to serve a cadetship, which is an officer training course in the Defence Forces here in Ireland. And my parents were somewhat concerned. They felt that I was maybe a little bit too tightly wrapped, and said, look, go out and join your friends in Australia. So I think my evolution to, first of all, joining the profession, but in 2011 when I arrived back from Australia, but finding my way back to Perth in the last month or so, I find it kind of really unique looking at that span of 14, 15 years as to how lost I was leaving Ireland, and what a positive impact Australia had on my life. The culture, the people, the freedom. As I said, I'm sitting in Bray here where I live at the moment, and obviously it's been pitch black from about 3:30 in the day. It's 2 degrees Celsius. So Ireland can be a very inhospitable place, and it's very difficult, particularly at this time of the year, to stay positive and motivated. And that was, I feel, even with us and my family having spent that month in Australia in October and through November, it's amazing just that vitamin D hit of how easier we found it since coming home, just carrying through and getting through it, knowing, okay, it will eventually, we're only a week or two away from the clock basically hitting its worst point of the year. So I'm going a bit all over the world here, but what I'm trying to get at is, the value really of our experience in Australia, I feel, has shaped my own evolution within the profession. And as I've progressed within our family firm, and qualified as a CFP, and taken on other exams, we would have always very closely watched what was happening in Australia, because what we were trying to do is emulate what you guys were doing. Other global leaders we would see, like our colleagues in South Africa and our colleagues in New Zealand. We, as a very small nation, probably find it difficult that albeit the CFP community here is getting larger all the time, it's sometimes we get a very insular mindset in terms of our ideas. And that's why it's so refreshing getting to spend time with you guys, with James and others, in Australia, and just expanding the mindset of where we can go as a profession.
And you know, perhaps modeling your practice on other financial planning practices that you've seen in other jurisdictions might be one reason why you've evolved to where you have. But I would say that you know, especially with the well-being focus, there's something obviously in your development, in your background, in your family heritage, that has led you to come to a conclusion that's pretty strong. Because even in Australia, I would say this focus on well-being might be becoming more popular, more important, but it's not something that I would say the majority of practices focus on. And so, you know, when I heard you speak, I was intrigued and curious as to what brought you to the conclusion that there's an opportunity in financial planning to really you know, incorporate well-being.
Yeah, I think it's unique because for us as financial planners, we have a really unique element with our clients in that we touch upon most aspects of their life in good health and bad. So we're very used to seeing this across the board where we can plan for the best outcome. But you and I know, Joe, that unfortunately life tends to derail at times when we least expect it. So this felt a really appropriate space for us as a family practice, given the fact that both my parents were involved and my two younger brothers. Obviously, the security of the practice was requisite on all of our continued health and well-being. And we were lucky because we're quite a sporty family. My dad had played football here in Ireland at a high level. My mum played basketball at a very high level. Myself and my two younger brothers had been involved in sports since we were children. And there was never a point in time as we were growing up that if we wanted to take on a sport, our parents were incredibly flexible to bring us. If we wanted to do martial arts, if we wanted to try, rugby, if we wanted to do whatever, there was never a question asked. And I suppose as a result of that, we've come from this sporting background. And I suppose even as I've gotten older, and I'm due to turn 40 in January. I suppose a lot of this has been playing on my mind that we're used to growing up in a culture where you hit a certain point in life and people say, well, it's okay for you now to stop doing these things. And because of the body doesn't recover as fast. And okay, you've got your own children now and you have these other responsibilities. And like, I remember thinking about this when I was younger and it kind of scared me because it's like, oh my God, when I hit 34 and 35, do I have to like stop doing these things that I love? So what we've really tried to focus on is ensuring like our continued ability to play the sports, to do the gym, to be able to swim, run, and feel confident and fit. And I suppose just naturally over time, this has evolved into a lot of our client conversations because we're very conscious when we're meeting with our clients. Like they tend to be people who think the same as us and who have the same moral set and the same ethics. And ultimately, what do most of our conversations come back to with them? It's our own involvement in sport and it's our own interest in a broader sports sense, whether that's Gaelic football, whether it's AFL, whether it's rugby. It's kind of irrelevant what specific sport it is, but it tends to devolve back to this. So we found that as a result of this, most of the people we were working with had come from these backgrounds and were very aware of the value and long-term well-being of staying fit, staying active and healthy. So we viewed this area as being like, well, we work in the money business, but what I think has been missed for a lot of people is that money is only the vehicle. It's not the outcome. And we're trying to redirect this conversation, and particularly domestically here, because we find that a lot of the people we're working with can't look back to previous generations who've retired because we just haven't had previous generations who've retired with wealth. But we've noticed that there's this kind of trade-off that as people are retiring now with more and more money, we're seeing considerable greater difficulties in the areas of health, mental well-being, loneliness, depression, loss of purpose. And I think a lot of these come back to very basic things and things that can be done, Joe, that don't require huge financial input. It's something we kind of wanted to be passionate about because I suppose even from our own sense, what was amazing with our own story and our practice, and you and I spoke about this, and I think this is a really unique thing that your family has experienced as well. But my dad joined this business in 1982 and effectively worked his socks off until the day he retired, which is in May of 2021. And again, I kind of look at the sacrifices that he made over those years at a time when there was no guaranteed income, there was no salary. It was effectively, you had to go out there and write policies and talk to people. And there's a lot of rejection, there's a lot of difficult things, but he never stopped him. He got up and got out. And I suppose seeing him have an incredibly successful retirement, or what we viewed as being a successful retirement in May of 21, was turned on its head 4 months later when he was diagnosed with stomach cancer. And I think the unique thing with that was here was a man who didn't smoke, played sports at a high level, was a very seldom drinker, mostly because he just didn't have the time because they were running to matches with myself and my brothers. So drinking wasn't really on the cards. So we were trying to work out from this, well, how does somebody who is ticking all the boxes of what looks like should be a great life, and they find themselves with this cancer? So I think it came back to the fact that over 40 years he had compounded on stress and worry and had denigrated areas of his physical aspect of his life when he was probably holding on too tight in respect of a work sense. And thankfully, you know, I think mentally as an individual, he sat himself down and worked out that he was going to get through it. And thankfully went through very, very serious surgery in early 2022. And thankfully has made to date a fantastic recovery. And I had taken over at that point as CEO of the business, and I sat down because I was working not dissimilar to yourself with my 2 younger brothers. I just really set out the task, like our goal, like our metric for success as a firm going forward is that no one else gets cancer, and that we can work for as little or as long as we want, knowing that our health and well-being is going to be in a really good place. And I think that had to be the paramount piece, because if our sole focus was on AUM and income and other areas, we have to give up something else somewhere in another aspect of our life, Joe. And we just made that decision that we weren't any one of us was willing to give that up, irrespective of the potential negative outcome, let's say, from an income standpoint. We'd much rather have this sort of continued health and well-being rather than be worried about what's coming around the corner.
So this is an incredibly resonant story, as you know, and as the some of the listeners might know. I've had a similar experience with my father, and fortunately, your father was able to get through. Unfortunately, my father didn't, but he I kind of reflect on this kind of this pattern of work at all costs, look after family at all costs, and what that might have done. Much like your father, my father was very quite healthy in a lot of different metrics, but I think the stress may be the sort of missing piece. So my sort of question is, like if my father or your father at the height of the peak of their careers, in the trenches working countless hours, if they were to see you as a financial advisor, what would you be telling them, and why? How could you unwind or redirect their path in such a way to help hopefully improve health outcomes? Because I think it's important. People are saying, well, here's two financial advisors that run practices saying that financial advice is the reason for improving health outcomes. And whilst I probably would think you agree that it's not the sole thing that you focus on to improve health outcomes, but it's actually largely it's very strong. It has a very strong impact, and I'd like to really explore that idea.
Well, I think we're really lucky to be in a position that we're effectively standing on the shoulders of what of your dad built and what my dad built. So we're able to peer over a wall that they could only, aspirationally think that at some day they might be able to climb over. So we're standing on their shoulders, effectively now being able to see over the other side. And I think we've seen the light. I think it kind of came back to this piece of, why wait for a catastrophic event to occur in your or one of your loved ones' lives to realize we've made a mistake, right? So it just didn't seem sense to continue on that pathway. And I think looking back historically, and we spoke about this in Perth, was that we've made this quantum leap from an industry to a profession. And unfortunately, I was really interested reading your recent article for the FAAA piece around let's call it the elder statesmen of the profession. And unfortunately for them, they were working at a time where they weren't viewed as professionals. They were viewed as individuals who came out and were selling things, and that was the requirement in order for them to get paid and be remunerated. And I think the real benefit for us is that we have, on the back of their really hard labor and toil and drive to standardize and drive this profession, it's made it much easier for us. So we just, I think, have a much broader view now on this, Joe, than maybe our dads had the ability to do so. And I think the real benefit of that, and exactly as you touched upon, I had a very interesting conversation with a client this morning who's heavily involved in the health space in Ireland. And we've a very top heavy health budget in Ireland. It's per capita the highest in any country in Europe, yet our health system is still a total basket case. And as he said, 1% of our health budget at the moment each year is spent on preventative medication or preventative. It's all reactionary, right? So what we had to look at is, if this isn't being done at a state level, and given the fact that we have such influence with the people we're working with, it's incumbent on us as people's, gatekeepers, as their advisors, as their, friends, as their family, as their colleagues, however they want to view us. It's absolutely incumbent on us to drive that message through, that there's a bigger way of looking at this thing. Because I would get concerned that, particularly in Ireland, we're beginning to look a little bit like a mini America, in the sense that it's capitalism at all costs. Like you said there, you have to work incredibly hard, because if you don't have the brand new BMW and you don't have the 3,000 square foot house, you're not succeeding. And like fundamentally, and I have a real gripe, particularly in Ireland, because I think we've such a rich heritage and culture, and I think where we've come from as a people is a really unique place, and I think that has to be celebrated, and we can't lose that sense of who we are. I think as a result, we have a good degree of responsibility that if the state isn't going to pick this up, it's really back to us to drive this message across the communities that we're working with, that putting the financial element of this at the front and center will ultimately lead to a poor outcome. Like, there's a larger question here about asking is, from an advice standpoint, is, are a lot of our clients overinvested? And by potentially them taking money out of various pension plans and investment plans that they have with us that we're being remunerated on, are we potentially putting them into a position where they're going to live longer, healthier, and better lives? I feel that the definition of financial planning is too narrow a space to actually describe where we want to go. And what you've been talking about, Joe, and what we're trying to develop is effectively a whole new sector. And it's a little bit unsteady because I don't think anybody has broached this before. It's a combination of a number of areas. But I feel if we don't get this right, I just don't really see any other area out there within our own economy of people taking this on, because ultimately working in as a financial planner is a love affair. And it's a love affair of care and compassion and empathy for the people we work with. So ultimately, there's no point in us delivering a message that, by the way, you've got $1 million in your pension, congratulations, but I'm really sorry to hear you now have type 2 diabetes. You've got high blood pressure. You have cholesterol that's through the roof, and your quality of life is just going to be eroded over time. So I think it really comes back to us to make this big leap and decision. Where do we want to be? Do we want to be an asset on the balance sheet of our clients, or do we want to be passive relative to where they're going in their lives?
Because I think I think maybe you'd agree, Mark, but people will often come to you and they see you as as an advisor that is solely responsible for the accumulation of their assets. That really what we're doing is effectively pushing around money to give them a greater wealth creation, and I don't think that's the full picture. And I think, if you could describe a little bit about, how we do things differently. And it's not just, are there cases where you're actually not accumulating more money, you're actually decumulating? Could you give us a little bit of color around that?
Yeah, I think it's really important because I think, first of all, we as financial planners are probably really well trained on that accumulation stage. We talked about it before we hit record, which is we're really, really good at getting people to the top of Everest, right? So getting to that point, and then it's kind of like, by the way, best of luck finding your way down. And I think very similar to our clients as they're entering the new season in their lives, as, let's say, particularly for those who are about to retire, is they've hit the peak of Everest. First of all, they're wrecked, they're running low on oxygen, and it's getting dark. So our clients face the very same journey on this thing. So what we're trying to rationalize and work out is, how do we best navigate that journey on the way down? Some of the areas that we're beginning to touch upon within our own practice is creating a number of areas where we feel will add considerable levels of looking at the various types of wealth. And we touched about this again in Perth, which is the financial element is there, but it's about 20% of the overall picture. And most people that we're talking to, Joe, are getting to this stage in life with money from multiple lifetimes anyway. And having come from backgrounds financially in this country where they never expected to have anything. So they've already far surpassed the financial element 2, 3, and 4 times over. So what we're finding is that obviously they're getting to a point where financially they're made up. They have the money, it's there, that's not a question. But who are they now as they step into their new season in life? And have they gone from working as a professional for 40 years to now being granny and granddad who are now de facto babysitters for their grandchildren? So this concept of the sense of identity and purpose, I think, is incredibly important, because for most people retiring today, of the past, that was a 3 to 5 year journey. It now looks closer to a 25 to 35 year journey. That's a very, very long time to have a loss of sense of purpose. So what we're really trying to do is sit down with a lot of our clients in the lead-in period to them potentially stepping off the employment and saying, what did you really want to be when you were in school? Like, and we touched upon this in again in Perth at the conference, is like, what were your aspirations? Where did you want to go as a child? And whether that's into history or different areas, it's amazing when
Well,
you expand on
that
these
sounds
clients.
interesting, Mark. That sounds
Yeah.
interesting because, like, what we're talking about is retirement not being the kind of end of life phase, but actually, in a sense, in the spirit of it, we're really looking back to what we were doing as a kid and saying, well, now financially, we might be able to um, take that off the table, so you can do the things that you've always wanted to do. That's kind of a refreshing look on what retirement is, which I don't think everyone thinks about.
Well, I think the aspirations for most people when they're children are unrealized dreams on the basis that somebody shook them and said, you won't make any money doing that. Like, you want to get a stable, pensionable job that you can't be fired from. And as a result, we have to look at this perspective of people as they retire have incredible wealth of value for an economy and for a state because they've spent 30 or 40 years honing their craft. In most cases, they're now debt free and they don't have the responsibility of raising a family. That means they're massive assets to the broader economy in areas that we haven't even envisaged yet. So it serves us all well to keep them as healthy and well as possible, and also as thriving members of society who are engaged. So if that means sitting down with them and working out as a postgraduate master's course in Irish history in Trinity College, well, then it's our role as our financial planner to go away and research that, build a narrative, work out how it's going to be paid for financially. And in most cases, we're saying this doesn't need to have any kind of return. If this role means you're now doing sightseeing tours for tourists in Dublin city centre as a passion project, well, we expect that the community and collaboration that you'll build from that, along with this sense of purpose, is highly likely to add 5, 7, 10 better years to your life. And by the way, we've already factored that in your cash flow plan. So financially, this is manageable. You don't need to make anything doing this. So I think there's a broader piece, because then coming back to the economy bit, if we can keep people living happier and longer lives from a standpoint from our end, like if we looked as financial planners, we're now getting 5 years of extra income, potentially, or 10 years of extra income from working with these people if we were being totally selfish about how we looked at it. But we're also now serving a very big beneficial area to the state, because one of the areas that we see is being a massive issue is the loneliness, anxiety, and depression for retirees. And mostly because they have stepped off the bandwagon into the unknown and it's just unraveled. And they haven't had a guiding hand like you or myself or James to come along and say, we've worked with a lot of people who look like you, who talk like you, who've been in the same position. And our role is to guide you through this. And again, we know it's going to take 4 or 5 steps to get this new season retirement journey right. But we're willing to stay the course with you. Other areas we're kind of investigating on this is bringing together pools of clients for social meals. That our parents, we have a membership in our local university in the club that will bring clients in for a coffee morning that's paid for by us, that they can just come in once a month knowing they can sit down and have conversations with people, share interesting stories, go on different adventures, and then build new groups of friends. Because whoever said that it's too late in life to build new friend groups? So what we're amazed to see, and as I look at the retirement of my own dad, he got very, very big into hill walking and hiking. And he met a new group of people who, for the most part, he knew about, let's say, a handful of the people as part of this 20-person group. Now he travels overseas with them 5 or 6 times a year. These are like some of his closest friends. And he was meeting them at a point in life when the assumption is that you narrow your funnel of social engagements with people around you. So he now at 70 is in better shape and nick than he probably was at 50, because he's now tapped into all these other resources. He's out in the open air. He's engaging and socializing with people who he doesn't know. So and by nature of being a financial planner himself, he's curious. He asks questions. And he knows the concept of having one mouth and 2 ears, that he's good at listening. And then he's able to retort back to people and ask them 3 or 4 months later, how did your grandson get on that thing? So people also want to be heard and seen. And if they have this sense of recognition that people care about them, these are all just the small 1% wins we can get on the line to steering people towards living better lives.
Mm, mm. So, in the practice itself that you operate, what are the types of things that you've operationalized? What are the initiatives that you've operationalized to be able to help people actually, I suppose, see money as a lever to pull to help them with their health and their well-being?
I think it was getting around. We built a client service calendar that included running off-site events that we'd go into this university and spend time in there talking and meeting with them. Um, I think their assumption with this, and it's funny, the client I met with today, who's big in this space, didn't go to the first one because again, his assumption was that this is going to all relate back to numbers. And like he was like, to be frank, numbers just don't switch me on. And this guy is well, like it just isn't of interest. So we got into a very broad conversation, and we were talking about Sahil Bloom's book, The Five Types of Wealth, and he was talking about his own engagement that he deals in health and fitness, and his engagement across the Nordic countries, and how our cousins in places like Norway and Denmark and Sweden are just so advanced at this. They're so far ahead of us in Ireland. And what we've asked him to do as a client to say, like, you're a really good research element on this because you're seeing this from a whole other side. And not only are you seeing it, you're actively engaged in particularly in places like Denmark and Finland with these people. So our objective now is to sit down with him and mine information from him about how we can help steer the journey. We bring that in-house or sit down with our operations manager, and we also almost go away and build a model that we can then go out and present to our clients. And a lot of this is like, I think why people are open and engaged in this, Joe, is they don't feel that because there's no hard sell or push this. We're not trying to sell them a new pension product. We're not trying to shift a life assurance policy. So the whole narrative has changed on this thing. And our real big push to the team, we've an offsite day tomorrow, and our big push really is about to 2026. How do we diminish the amount of time we spend talking about money in our meetings? How do we get that from the 80 back to the 20% rule? Because even for us, and I know you feel this as well. Like as I said, I'm hitting that landmark age myself of turning 40 in January. And I'm like, do I really want to continue in this profession for another 20 years as per what it looked like previously? Or do I want to go on this journey with people like you and James and others and redevelop this thing and build it to like what I'm passionate and interested about and bring our clients on that journey? So one of the areas we're engaged in and what we're trying to do is we've brought in a health expert who's very advanced on medical research around blood testing for people as they reach the new season. And this is one of these blood tests that captures 400 or 500 data points and builds like it's I call it the medical equivalent of a financial plan that we will build. Really what we wanted to do with our clients is bring them on board and very softly engage in events where we have this individual there, practitioner. But rather than saying to them, now you go off and engage with him directly, we're going to build a model where we will cover the cost as a firm for those clients to go and see this medical practitioner and run the blood tests. We don't need to know the results. We don't need for them to come back and tell us that they got an A plus or that but if we can jump in and move into that preventative space, all the better. Now, here's the kicker. We know that these people are out in the world as well. And somebody might say to them in their golf club or when they're at a rugby match, ask them what they've been up to. And of course, they're going to say, well, you're never going to believe where I've just been. So we feel even from, this is an unbelievable marketing opportunity as well to do something like this. But it does add a greater good. I feel we're such a curious profession that it'd be so selfish of us to retain all of this information and knowledge and not push it out there to the wider community. And all we have to do is we just have to get a handful of wins here. And wins for us are not monetary. My dad always had a great expression with this. If you look after people, the money will look after itself. So we have to ethically and morally follow through in the compass of what my mum and dad set up for this firm. like you asked about it on, how do we carry this forward? Like for the next, from the previous generation, I think we have to turbocharge this message. The
Yeah,
money thing,
it almost, Mark, feels unethical to continue to watch clients climb the Mount Everest peak when all they ever needed to climb was a peak which was much lower. It just, to that point, like, it just seems almost unethical to watch people almost unbeknownst to them suffer because we feel as an advice community that our sole responsibility is to just climb and climb and climb and climb. That's not right. That's incorrect. And it's quite binary and kind of narrow in its thinking. So I really love what it is you're advocating for here.
I think it has to be like our form of a Hippocratic oath. You know, that kind of way. I think that we have to be like, and trends like this, you don't need mass movements to get momentum on this either. Trends like this tend to come from very, very small communities, but people who are incredibly passionate and fundamentally believe that it's the right pathway. But what we also probably as a profession need to be wise to is a lot of the roles that we currently perform that are seen as value add to clients are being eroded by the continuous drive of AI. So if we don't pivot our service proposition to human-led directives, we will be eaten alive by this thing.
Because every AI program will eventually do a spreadsheet, right, Mark? A spreadsheet is not where you want to be, is not the secret sauce to a financial planning practice. The spreadsheet is not it. It's perhaps the design, the idea, the articulation, the mobilization of capital because you've created the motivation to do so through your clients. But the actual spreadsheeting itself or the investment offerings, that's not where your secret sauce is.
No, I totally agree, and I think it's probably not so much even with these retiree clients. It's probably the next generation coming through.
Yeah.
And that's why we need to have areas that switch them on. So if they can come in and see, one of the areas that we're talking about doing as well very heavily into 2026 is running family meetings, which is effectively taking these new season clients and offering them the potential to have their children sit in and be involved at meetings at a level that they want to know, to understand things like enduring power of attorney, wills, what does probate look like? What if somebody is incapacitated? Who has the keys to the kingdom? So who knows how to access things? How do we remove those unnecessary stresses in people's lives? I think the other area as well is also, we know a lot of that the next generation coming through are not engaging in advice. Like the numbers are really, really stark. Like I know the numbers out of the UK, for example, are that roughly speaking in 2000, about 22% of the UK population engaged in advice. And as of last year, it's down circa about 5%. We don't do that data in Ireland, but if it's 5% in England and the UK, it's probably 3% here, which means 97% of the population of Ireland, of people who are in employment, are operating as sole vessels effectively in the North Sea, which means they could be toppled at any time by a gigantic wave. But in order for us to switch them on and engage them, the narrative of the past has obviously not been sufficient enough to get them tuned in. That's why we need to move beyond this piece.
Yeah, I think it's interesting why the younger generation aren't necessarily engaging with advice, whether it be that they're more self-directed because there's AI, whether it be that the costs of advice are higher than they ever have been before. But
True.
It's incumbent upon us as advisors to be able to give that advice because in some way, because if we don't, health outcomes are on the line too, because good financial decision making often leads to good health outcomes.
Yeah, but everybody who engages in this, and it's not dissimilar for you and I when we engage in other facets of our life. Like the first question we ask is, what's in this for me? And what's in this for me at the moment from the next generation coming through from a financial advice standpoint is not relevant to what they want. So we need to pivot really, really hard on this thing and move away, exactly as you said, from the spreadsheets. And we need to get back into the trenches with them and say, here's the data points. Here's what we're seeing into the future. Here's how we've successfully navigated that journey with your parents. We want to steer you guys on that journey as well. And we want to do that in a fair and equitable manner, in a transparent way in respect to charges. But our charges can't be dictated, or our value is probably more appropriate, can't be dictated by whether or not your pension value is up year to date. That's irrelevant. That's totally irrelevant. We've no control over that. We're looking at the broader picture of this thing, and that's really looking after and caring for the health and well-being of your family. Because what we're trying to say is that's what we're doing ourselves. Like, that's what we're trying to do. I'm trying to do with my wife, my own two boys, is we're trying to have that journey. That's why we took the month to go to Australia. I'm not waiting until retirement to have fantastic adventures. Like, it just so happened it was lucky, Joe, to get to come and speak to you guys in the CFP community in Australia. I was coming anyway because I have family there, and
This is absolutely the way we need to be going, Mark, in this episode. The idea that you've had a lifetime of actually spending time with clients and seeing what they do and families what they do, and you've been able to pick up both the nuances of what is helpful and adaptive, and what is sort of maladaptive and not helpful. And so, what have you instituted in your life, in your family life, that is maybe a little controversial, maybe doesn't hit the norms, maybe, others and friends and family are looking at you going, why are you doing that again? Like, are you being responsible? Because I can tell you, I'm not financially ready for a 4-day working week, but I tell you what, I'm going to do a 4-day working week next year.
well, I love that concept. I love that idea. And I think, if anything, is the actual overall quality and caliber of your life, Joe, going to be higher as a result? Because when we look at the studies on this thing, and we could look at our own life, and I think Daniel Kahneman wrote a study of this around 2010 in the US, looking at the median income for families before their happiness levels began to diminish. $75,000. If you were to fast forward it to now, in US terms, it's about $130,000, let's say. And after that, the caliber and quality, because you're including too many worries and fears now as that income grows. So what we had to kind of work out, even for ourselves as a family, is like, what did we aspire to have? Like, so what, when I was growing up and we had all these dreams, what looked like a really good life? Like, I think we're meeting that. I think we have it. So rather than going beyond it, why not double down on what it is? So you're like, the ability to sit down with the team and say, look, by the way, we're disappearing here for 3.5 weeks. And to come back and to say to my two sons, I will have you back in Australia within the next 2 years to see our family there. Because I can't allow for them to go that length of time, or for me, for them not to see their cousins and their aunt and uncle. So it's incumbent on me and us as a family unit to develop our working life around our adventures, and not our working life dictating that these adventures are put off until, somebody said to me, I always dreamed of going to Australia. I said, well, why dream? You have the money to go now. Oh, it's too late. Or Jesus, we're too old now, and it's too dangerous. And when I say dangerous, I mean an animal sense. And
Yeah.
like, it's just,
You ever seen a spider in a conference?
oh man, like it's just, I still have the Shark Tracker WA app on the phone. I love looking at it. The only thing that can kill you in Ireland is the rain and the cold. So this is the difficulty. So, but again, coming back to a wider piece on this is, as I'm saying, like, we're sitting here, the central heating has been on in the house all day. The central heating is in the office. We're dealing with this recirculated heated air. We don't see the sun for 3-4 months of the year. We, as a result, have to take it. That's incredibly important for us as Irish people, as effectively a Northern European race, to get out of Dodge for the period of time between November and March. It's absolutely incumbent. So we've kind of looked at this as a family, said, how do we develop this mentality where we can disappear every year or so and get out and get to a place like Perth and spend time with family and soak up that vitamin D? Because when we come back, it's like your 4-day week, Joe. My work when I'm there is going to be 10 times as efficient. And this comes back to a sports bit earlier on. If we constantly run a team, like if the Irish rugby team gets no break over the course of the year, they burn themselves out. They need an off season. And the off season is not as much as just pure recovery. It's thinking about what the next season should look like. We're not spending enough time processing what we want in life. So what we've tried to angle, and some of the work I'm doing with my own coach here in Ireland is about taking that time to visualize what looks like a good existence for me and my family going forward, which is going to be a different one for you, a different one for James. Everybody has a narrative and their own personal story, but nobody is taking the time to map this out and work out where do we want to go with this. So this consolidation of assets for the sake of consolidation is not really going to get us anywhere. And I think it's really important. Even when I came back and spoke to the clients, like bar none, they were thrilled. And they were asking, how'd you get on? And I said, well, I think you should go here. So imagine being able to come back, Joe, and make a recommendation to clients who have the assets to say, we're in Margaret River. I think you'd love it down there. You're really fond of Australian wines. I'm going to give you the name of 3 wineries you need to go down to. And here's the contact point of the guy down here who's going to look after you. It's up to us to drive that through and then stay on their case. Did you book the flights? No. Okay, here's the itinerary. We're going to build the itinerary for you. We're going to tell you where to stay. We're going to give you the contact details of who, like, that's the job, right? Because we're telling them, save this money, put it in this fund, put these charges on, whatever it is, put this contract structure in place. We need to move the neck needle forward now and start driving other areas. They won't do it unless we push them, but we can't just tell them. We have to show them.
Yeah, it's interesting. When you were talking, I was feeling like I'd really like to sort of express this particular concept. I'm not sure if I'm going to get it right, but this idea that, Dad, the things that Dad did kind of created a pattern in me around hard work and work ethic and also time on the job, right? And those same things are the things that I've suggested and you've suggested were kind of the reasons for increasing an incremental stress and a lack of kind of balance. And yet having a 4-day working week, I'm battling this kind of idea of, am I shirking my responsibility? Should I be the 5-day, 6-day work week type person, 24/7? And I know intellectually and cognitively, I believe that makes no sense at all. But there's an emotional pattern that continues even in me that says, oh, is this the right decision? What would other people think? And I think that's what might prevent people from making these very clear and obvious decisions for their own well-being and their own health.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I think we all suffer from that sense of guilt because we've nearly been pre-programmed to this idea of we have to be at 100 miles an hour all the time, succeeding. And what we're missing is that you can't see the negative impact of this physically because it's happening in here and it's happening in here, right? So if we continue to erode this and run the car until it hits empty, we're no use to anybody. One of the biggest responsibilities we have for the people we work with is we have to be on the pitch with them for multi-decades. So our clients expect us to see them through this new season in their life. And this new season is now 2 to 3 decades. I'm no use to them if I'm laid up in a hospital bed. And neither are you. And I think if anybody had a kind of query or concept of this thing, I think it's very easily explained that it is absolutely essential that we keep on top of this thing for ourselves. And yeah, that does include having personal days and admin days where we can get our own lives sorted out. But it also means we need to have some adventures like this stuff as well. And we need to put ourselves in a position where we're going and learning. Like, so the biggest learn for me coming away was 3 or 4 bits that I picked up from spending time with you and others in Australia have been absolutely gold and have been game changing for us in our practice here in Ireland. But if I hadn't allocated the time to go and do that, Joe, I would have missed out on those bits. So I think sometimes the unexpected arrives when we least expect it, but we have to put ourselves in positions where this comes along. And I think we have to move past this point of guilt. Your practice of what you and James have built and what your dad crafted is going to be a success because the passion, because of the work commitment that you guys have and the honesty and ethical approach, right? But again, what sometimes we have to do is in order to take that up another 5%, we have to totally disengage from the business. We have to get out of Dodge and we have to go to a totally new environment and rediscover ourselves and come back fitter, stronger, with a better tan, with full of vitamin D and full of new ideas. Say, okay, I've had an idea, and we're
Kind of reminds me of a comedian, Mark, where comedians who end up becoming quite successful sometimes lose their touch with time because they're immersed in the comedy world rather than in the real world. So to be able to actually, or even artists, musical artists often say that I can't just keep writing and writing and writing and writing. I need to actually go and live my lived experience before I can go back and do the next thing. So it's this idea of compression and decompression, and giving yourself the space to be able to determine what the next thing actually is. That's really super important.
I think it's hard until you've broken the mold on it, Joe.
Yeah.
Like, I can tell you off the back of this, is the first time really in 14, 15 years where we'd actually taken time and gone away. And all it's done is give me an appetite to do it again. And I know that and that's not from a selfish standpoint. It's also like a creativity element. Like, I know that by traveling more and spending more time away, when I am present and there, like, I'm going to be so much more valuable because my application of work now is to get me on the next adventure. So they go hand in hand with each other. I now have a purpose and a rationale, because up until now, what are we really working for here? Like, is it that pot of gold at the end of the rainbow? And we know when we get to the end of the rainbow, the pot of gold isn't actually there. So we got to surf this wave while it's there, and we got to make sure we're doing it. Because if for some reason I'm incapacitated at some point in the future, at least I know my two boys can say, well, look at the memories we built over the course of that month in Perth. So while we still have the good of our health, because we don't know when it's going to be taken away from us. And this is the difference between that and the markets on investing of assets. Look at any 20-year timeline. You and I know the chances of losing money in a 20-year timeline is effectively zero. But we know a 20-year cycle of health, for the most part, is invisible erosion.
That's true.
And that's why so, like, this is why it's not to say the investment of the money is irrelevant, but it's no longer the bigger picture. And we really have to grasp this. We owe it to the people. We owe it to our countries. I know you're a passionate Australian. I'm a passionate Irishman. I owe it to the others in my local community to add this value. If the state isn't going to pick up the tab for this thing, then people like us who are in positions of influence need to go out and tell people we care about you. And this is how we feel we can help you guys and your family live better, more safer, more healthier lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely agree. When it comes to, the listeners today thinking about seeking financial advice or considering their own financial advisors and what's happening, what sort of selection criteria would you apply when it comes to looking for a good advice practice, and their what should their focuses be, and how do you find a financial advisor that has a focus on these broader concepts?
It's so tough, isn't it? Like,
It is
it's
tough.
because if you
It's not
think about
easy.
it, like, we actually started asking clients recently, like, how they feel before they come in to see us, because we weren't really getting that as a metric. And they're like, nervous, worried. And we're like, wow, like, why are they nervous? Like, their fund values are up like 20% or whatever, like, they're flying. And it's because of this sense of the unknown, Joe. And I think this is really, really important that, anybody making that assessment or having an initial conversation is, you need to rationalize how much time you're being given to talk and tell your story. And I think if you're not being asked really high quality questions by your advisor about where you've come from, about what your family experiences are, about the personal circumstances in your own health journey and the wider health journey and the path that you want to go on, I think that has to be a red flag, because consumers and clients need to work with people who care about them first and the money second. And I think if those boxes aren't being ticked, you need to be able to get up and say, really appreciate your time, but maybe this isn't for us. And we as advisors need to shift the narrative of the conversation that we're having with our clients. We tend to think that clients come in and they have a need and our job is to solve the need. Our job is not to solve the need. Their immediate need tends to not be the issue. We need to be able to get deeper on this thing, and we need to deconstruct what their underlying thought process of what we do is straight away. And we need to steer them back towards leading this better life and asking them the right questions. And we then as planners know as well, if somebody doesn't want to engage in that piece and they just have this other need, that's absolutely fine. But I think it's so, so important that relationships, trust and care are at the forefront. And if you're not feeling that as part of a conversation, then I don't think it's something that people should be engaging with on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think the idea of, seeing an advisor who's basically a what have you got and where do I put it type advisor
Yeah.
is the way
Yeah.
I put that, is exactly the opposite approach. And in fact, I imagine some Australians or the Irish out there might go to an advisor thinking to themselves, well, if they're not going to talk to me about the money or as much about the money, then they must not know what they're doing with the money. But in actual fact, they know exactly what they're doing with the money. They just know that there is a deeper meaning to that money, and they'll be more intentional with their strategies if they actually understand you as an individual, your family, and what you want to be into the future. Without that detail, without that color, and without you feeling a little uncomfortable in meetings where they're like, why are they asking me that question? That's a bit interesting. Without that, then I just don't think you're in the advice piece that we're talking about at the moment, the ideal advisors that we're talking about right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, as I said earlier on, and mentioned ad nauseum in on stage in Perth, was money is not the outcome; it's only the vehicle, right? But we've come up in a profession where we were told that money is the be all and end all. It's the only thing that, and we need to hold on really tight here. And it's not. That's the thing, and that's why it's so important that we just drive this change and narrative. And again, these movements, Joe, tend to happen very organically on a small base from people who are very, very passionate about it before they others catch on to this. And what you're doing with your content is absolutely incredible, because it's pushing in an uncomfortable space for people. But these are uncomfortable conversations we're going to start to have with people if we really truly want to be of value.
Yes, that makes sense. Now, I know that I asked this question of all my guests during this season, and I'm curious about how you would answer this, given I feel like it's implied that you're probably doing this right now, but touch wood, you have many more years of great health, obviously, and I'll touch the wood here. But if you only had one good year, what would you do? Would you modify anything? How would you live your life?
Yeah, that's it's a super question, and it's a difficult one.
It is a
But
difficult one.
I would like to think that the pathway that we're on as a family is that we're moving into a position that each year going forward, it's like we're doing that. So, like I said, what felt like a very difficult decision to come to Australia for such a prolonged period of time, looking back now, was such a no-brainer. And I think it's getting into a culture of saying yes rather than the immediate no because of all of these potential repercussions and issues. I think it's having the maturity to rationalize that none of us are promised tomorrow. And if we're not on the pitch, we have to think about the potential memories that we've left for others who've engaged with us. And it's just go out there and try and live it as well as possible. It's a very tough question. I feel we could sit here for another hour and try and break it down. But yeah, I think it's just about being, I think, in a constant state of gratitude of what you have and being in a position to be of service to others. Because we get twice back from giving to others than we will be receiving. And I just feel that if we can continue in that own methodology, that so much good will tend to come from that.
That's amazing. It's a great answer, because often when you ask that question, it's a time to be selfish, but in actual fact, in the higher level of selfishness is to make sure that you're altruistic and you do get the payoff from looking after others. And I think that's what you've embodied through the practice that you have. And it's why I'm super keen offline to share and collaborate with you, and our respective practices, because there's a lot to learn from each other. And I think we're very much on the same trajectory, and it's why I've run this podcast. And it's people like you that make me feel confident about the future and confident about the podcast, that it's actually on the right path. And so my instincts were to contact you and have a conversation with you at the FAAA Congress at the end of your great presentation. My instincts were correct, very aligned, and I've really appreciated this discussion, Mark. It's been amazing.
Joe, thanks so much. Like it genuinely, I'm humbled, and it's such a privilege, as I said, even getting a chance to meet with yourself and James. You know, any value that I brought to that conference has been trebled from the value that I've received from you and our unbelievably collaborative and kind and sharing colleagues out of Australia. As I said, this is why this journey is so exciting, and that the ceiling height on this is really dictated by where we want to set it. And exactly just as you mentioned there, and I mentioned it again on stage, was we may have different accents, we may operate in different tax codes, and one of us may run the risk of being eaten by a shark, whereas the other probably doesn't have that risk. But ultimately, the outcomes we want for our clients and our own families tend to be mirrored to each other. So this is why it's so refreshing. And as I said, I was so excited when we had that conversation just off stage, and like blown away, because sometimes you feel very isolated in this space, because early movers on these things tend to be second guessing, like, oh, what are we doing here? Like, do we just stick with the status quo? And that's why, even coming back, one of the areas why it's made it easier coming back to, like, as I said, 2 degrees and pitch black, is like, look at the great people who we're now collaborating with. The ability to pick up the phone and for you and I to have a chat, as we did even last week offline, about other areas of our business without any ego, to try and help one another get better outcomes for our clients. Like, what a magnificent profession to be involved in. Like, how exciting is that? Because we're only scraping the surface.
Agree. I mean, the ability to have a global connection like we do is something that I wouldn't have dreamed of. And when I was, learning about financial planning at university, it was quite a narrow focus. It's really changed, and it's a beautiful thing. So again, I appreciate it, and the listeners are going to get a wonderful bunch of wisdom from this. And so again, very much appreciate it, and what you're doing for the Australian community as well. And look forward to catching up with you when you do your next trip down here. And who knows, I might come to Ireland, to be honest. It's a beautiful place. I've been there before, so.
You're always welcome. Come and visit us here. So we live beside the sea. It's quite cold now at the moment. We're not getting that good weather, but you're always welcome.
I'll come when the sun's out. I'll come when the sun's out.
Even that good. It's not even that good then. So don't set. We won't set unrealistic expectations.
All right.
Bizarrely, I will be back sooner, because I'm very fortunate and privileged. I will be in New Zealand in March at the Financial Advice Association of New Zealand's annual conference. So I'm actually speaking at their conference on the 24th of March. I've had very fortunate to be Nick Crakes, who's their CEO, and collaborate with Nick around some of these ideas on expanding this global collaboration. So I'm, again, like, so humbled to be involved with our colleagues in New Zealand and have such great affinity and time for what's being done in Australia and New Zealand. That's what I mean. This is so exciting, and my intention is to get back as often and meeting with you guys and having conversations and just expanding this and challenging each other as well. Pushing
Absolutely.
on these things. How do we get better?
Agree. Thanks again. Appreciate you coming on. It's been great.
If you have resonated in any way with the sentiments of this podcast, we would be delighted to direct you to our website, www.itsneveraboutmoney.com.au, for more free resources and education aimed at improving your capacity to make sound financial decisions for the benefit of your family. We wish you every success, however you define it.